Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the mechanics behind Sri Lanka's proposed property tax. If you've been following the economic landscape, taxation is always this heavily debated topic. But what happens when a tax isn't really just about collecting revenue for the government? What if it's actually designed as a mechanism to fundamentally rewire how a whole nation's wealth flows? Well, today, we're going to explore exactly that. We're looking at a pretty fascinating proposal in Sri Lanka, where property taxation is being viewed as a vital tool for economic restoration. We're going to break down exactly how an economy can get trapped in a vicious negative loop, and more importantly, how a targeted policy might be the key to finally breaking it.
So right out of the gate, we have to ask a bold question. Why introduce a new tax at all? To solve this mystery, we really have to look back at the hostile financial environment that forced individuals into survival mode over the years. We normally think of taxes as a drag on growth, right? But in this specific context, we've got to understand the symptoms before we can understand the cure. For a long time in Sri Lanka, the underlying financial system was incredibly fragile. People with capital were looking at an environment where their savings were just under constant threat. And the biggest threat of all, high inflation. Imagine working hard, building up your savings, and then just watching helplessly as high inflation rapidly eats away at your purchasing power. It triggers this primal financial instinct. You need to find somewhere, anywhere, to park your money where it won't lose its value.
The safe haven search, finding safety in a fragile economy.
Now think about the stark dilemma that high net worth individuals faced here. On one hand, you have starting a business. In a normal, healthy economy, this is exactly what you want people with excess money doing. But in Sri Lanka, historically, there was a highly unfavorable business environment. Starting a business was widely seen as a flat-out bad decision. The risks were just way too high. So on the other hand, you have buying real estate. Because starting a business was completely off the table and leaving cash in the bank literally meant losing it to inflation, pouring excess money into real estate became the only logical safe haven. If you had capital, buying land or property was hands down the most rational move to protect your wealth. But, and here's where the story takes a sharp turn, what is entirely rational for one individual can sometimes be absolutely devastating for the whole country.
Inside the vicious cycle, the unintended domino effect. While buying property was a really smart individual defense mechanism against inflation, this desperate search for a safe haven inadvertently triggered a destructive nationwide macroeconomic loop. Let's look at step one. We have continued buying of real estate by people with excess money. Because so much capital is flowing exclusively into one single sector, it creates this massive, demand-driven inflation of properties. It's supply and demand, plain and simple. When everyone with deep pockets wants to buy land as a giant savings account, the price of that land skyrockets. And that leads us directly to step two. Properties become completely unaffordable to many average Sri Lankans. The continuous flood of excess money inflated property prices so abruptly that it effectively locked everyday citizens, the working class, and young families entirely out of the housing market. They aren't competing with other families looking for homes anymore, they're competing with wealthy investors who are just looking for a place to park their capital.
And the cycle doesn't just stop at high house prices. It ripples out into the very fabric of society. Think about it. This incredibly unaffordable housing market leads to deep, widespread frustration. Imagine being a young professional, working your tail off, but knowing you will literally never be able to afford a home in your own country because the prices are artificially inflated by investment hoarding. This frustration was a major driving force behind mass migration out of the country. People simply packed up and left for places where they felt they actually had a shot at building a life and owning a home. And that brings us to step two. This mass exodus of the young and skilled results in an aging population left behind. From an economic standpoint, an aging demographic means fewer people in the workforce, less innovation, and a much heavier burden on social systems. The dominoes just keep falling.
Which brings us to a really powerful quote derived directly from our source material. This is also a huge blow to the capital market, resulting in a negative effect on economic growth. So the absolute crucial point here is that when excess money is hoarded in real estate, when it's just sitting entirely dormant as bricks and mortar or empty plots of dirt, instead of being invested in dynamic economic activities, it actively starves the capital market. For any country to move forward, to innovate, to create jobs, excess money has to be invested in economic activities by high net worth individuals. When that money is trapped in real estate safe havens, the engine of the economy is deprived of the very fuel it needs, stunting the entire nation's progress. This is the exact definition of a vicious cycle.
Breaking the cycle, redirecting the flow of capital.
So, to get the country moving forward again, we have to figure out how to turn this vicious cycle completely around. We need a systemic shock to change behavior. The proposed solution is a very deliberate dual-prong approach. Step one, the government must create a favorable environment for businesses. This is the carrot. and it's a stated policy goal of the current NPP government. You absolutely have to make it attractive and safe for people to invest their money in companies, startups, and job-creating ventures. But listen, a carrot alone isn't enough if real estate remains an untaxed, highly profitable vault. That's why we need step 2, impose a property tax. This is the stick. By taxing property, you increase the cost of just sitting on dormant real estate. Suddenly, parking your money in an empty lot isn't a cost-free safe haven anymore. It actually costs you money every single year. When you combine these two steps, making business attractive while making property hoarding expensive, you completely change the calculus for an investor.
And this illustrates the ultimate goal of the policy shift. By applying pressure on real estate through taxation and simultaneously opening up opportunities in the business sector, that excess money finally starts to move. It flows back into the capital market. This right here is the turning point. We're using these policies to systematically redirect that excess wealth away from dormant property and back into active, productive capital markets where it can actually do some real good for the broader economy.
What's truly compelling about this is the end result. When money flows into the right places, it creates a thriving economic environment that actually serves everyone. Think about the balance. On one side, it's highly beneficial for high net worth individuals. They are now investing in businesses in a favorable environment, generating actual dynamic returns rather than just relying on artificial property inflation. On the other side, it's incredibly beneficial for ordinary people. With wealthy individuals no longer buying up all the real estate as a giant savings account, property demand cools off, making housing affordable again. Plus, the capital flowing into those new businesses creates jobs and national prosperity. It shifts the entire economy from a zero-sum game where one person's safe haven is another person's lockout into a mutually beneficial ecosystem.
Which leaves us with a pretty critical thought to ponder. We've seen the logic, right? We understand the fragile environment that drove money into real estate, we've walked through the devastating domino effect of that vicious cycle, and we've analyzed the proposed solution of pairing business incentives with property taxation. But, as we all know, theory is one thing and execution is something else entirely. Can this targeted property tax, combined with newly created business incentives, truly rebalance the economic ecosystem for the future? Will high net worth individuals actually shift their behaviors? And will ordinary citizens finally see some relief in the housing market? It is a massive economic experiment playing out in real time, and it's absolutely crucial to watch. Thanks for joining me to unpack this one. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.